But gee whiz, Stan, if you tried to stop us, we'd have to use our evil satanic powers on you.
Right, whatever. I'm taking down the manger I built.
Rectus Dominus.
The Powerpuff Girls, released on Cartoon Network in 1998 and created by Craig McCracken. The series focuses around 3 young girls created in a lab who also happen to possess superpowers, thanks to some chemical X. The 3 girls, Blossom, Bubbles and Buttercup, would use their superpowers to help fight crime and defeat the forces of evil. Though sounding simple on paper, the series was surprisingly good, featuring a wide variety of characters, colourful animation, great comedy.
Oh, hi, Bubbles. How are you?
Oh, Bubbles, have mercy.
Mercy is for the weak.
And a crazy amount of violence, to which I'm still baffled how some of it even got through the censors. If you want to see my full review on the show, you can check out my What Went Wrong series, which is in the top right hand corner. The show would get praise from both critics and audiences, and would soon become Cartoon Network's most popular show. Not just pulling in great viewing figures, but also a great source of income from its various merchandise. Seeing the show's potential, Cartoon Network Studios made the bold decision to give the green light for a Powerpuff Girls movie to release in cinemas, something that had never been done before. With series creator Craig McCracken directing and much of the original team still involved, plus working with an increased budget, this was sure to be a guaranteed hit. Right? Oh. How could something that had all the right ingredients in place turn into such a disaster? Well, let's dive in and take a look. But first, a quick thank you to this video's sponsor, NordPass. We all know that hacking is a serious threat online, but it's not always easy to fight against, as ideally you want a different password for each website you log into, but then having to remember them all can be a bit of a nightmare. NordPass is a password manager which will store all your passwords for you in one place, so there's no need to memorize them all. Also integrating an autofill feature so you can log in instantly. And you may be thinking, well, can't I just use my browser's built-in password manager instead? Well, NordPass has significantly better security, using advanced encryption algorithms to ensure the security of your passwords, meaning no one else can access it, not even the NordPass team themselves. Plus, you can import over your current password stored in your browsers with just one click of a button. NordPass also comes with other features, such as generating secure passwords for you, storing personal and payment details, and a data breach scanner to find out if any of your information has been leaked. If you want to try NordPass yourself, go to nordpass.com/SteveReviews to get access to the best offer, or use code SteveReviews at the checkout to get an additional 4 months for free, or click the link in the description. Thank you for listening, guys. Now back to the review. Releasing into cinemas in July 2002, the film immediately had a rocky start. Because of the TV show's popularity, the film was predicted to make $15 million in its opening weekend, but ended up only making $6.1 million over the course of 5 days, only continuing to dwindle as the weeks passed, to eventually just make $11.4 million in the US and $5 million overseas, barely managing to overcome its $11 million budget. Now, as a business exec of Cartoon Network, you'll be looking at this and thinking, the Powerpuff Girls is our most popular show, and if that is struggling to turn a profit, then what chance do our other shows have? And so as a result, all the planned future Cartoon Network films were either downgraded to a straight-to-television release, or just cancelled altogether, including a Samurai Jack film which was going to provide closure to the television series, to which we eventually got the god-awful Season 5 closure instead, but I'll talk more about that in a future vid. This would also make the Powerpuff Girls movie to be the first, and last, cinema release for the studio, and it wouldn't be until Teen Titans Go to the Movies in 2018 that we would get another cinema release of a Cartoon Network show. How could something that was so popular on TV get such a poor turnout for the cinema? Well, part of the answer lies within the audience itself. Despite on surface level being a show that would appeal to young girls, the show actually had a huge fan base of older audiences. Hell, I was one of those fans. Sure, I was only 11 years old at the time, but I was still considered as one of the older demographics for the show. Basically, this show had bronies before bronies were a thing. The studio was actually wise to this fact, with Craig McCracken even stating he was aware that a large demographic of the show's audience consisted of, quote-unquote, underground adults, and so efforts were actually put in to make the film more appealing to them and have it be an action-focused flick with a more serious plot.
And I saw the movie as a chance to reclaim the mantle of the Warpath Girls in a weird way. Just like, no, we're gonna make an action adventure movie and it's gonna be powerful like you've never seen it before.
Which, though sounding good, sadly didn't work out. Now, speaking from personal experience, despite being a big fan of the show at the time, did I rush out to go and see it in cinemas?
No!
See, even though I was aware that the show was a lot more badass than it appeared on the surface, a lot of people who hadn't seen the show would just see it as a kids' film mainly aimed at girls. This sadly was only further reinforced by the film's marketing, because when looking at the trailer...
You dare to challenge me?
Yeah, that's exactly the impression you get, with its tagline,
Saving the world before bedtime.
cool. And me being in the type of school where you would get beaten up if you so much as wore your backpack too high, I sure as hell wasn't going to risk the physical onslaught of asking people to go see the Powerpuff Girls movie with me, and I was far too self-conscious to risk go seeing it alone. Craig McCracken even seemed to acknowledge this attitude in a 2013 interview. Quote, "The kids didn't come. A lot of boys who were fans of it didn't want to tell people they were fans of it and didn't buy tickets. There's a safety of watching Powerpuff at home if you're a guy. So it seemed what once worked as the show's strength, being able to appeal to a wide audience on television, was now proving to be its very weakness. But I, like many others, did manage to eventually see the film once it released on DVD. So what did I think of it then? Meh, pretty disappointing to be honest.
I thought you were good.
Not that the film is terrible or anything, it just feels very... The animation is looking alright. You can tell there was a higher budget for this as we get some really nice looking shots in places, but the animation had moved from Hanna-Barbera Productions, who did the TV series, over to Cartoon Network Studios, and though it looks the same for the most part, there were subtle changes in the design that I never quite liked. The girls look more rounded, the way the fists clench, and the eye pupils which would be pressed flat. Purely subjective I know, but I just never got on with it. The music however I actually quite like. It's composed by James L. Venable, who also did the music for the TV show. The team didn't want to use pop songs throughout the film, which was popular for animated films at the time, so instead blended a mix of techno with traditional classical. And with the increased budget, James now had a full orchestra to work with, and you can feel the difference in the score. Sadly, however, that's where my positives for the film mostly end. So now we're going to get into the problems that I had with it. First up, with all the possible ideas they could have gone for, they decided to go with a prequel approach, showing us the girls after they've just been created, but they don't know how to control their powers, so end up destroying the city, and so the city folk hate them. So the girls now need to prove themselves in order to win back the hearts of the people. To which I ask, why? Like, no offense, but who gives a shit about what happened in the early days? The only time I think you should go down the prequel route is if there was some big event established in the show's lore that led to present day. Like, let's take Adventure Time for example. We know that there was a big mushroom war which led to a large chunk of the earth getting blown up, and how that changed from the world we know today to the weird fantasy land we see in the show, even leading to the creation of some of our characters. Yeah, I'd be on for a prequel film to show how that transpired. With the Powerpuff Girls though, there was really no gap to fill. We get from the show's opening that the professor created them and then they went out and fought crime. What else do we need? You know how in the Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends TV series, we were first presented with a movie which showed how Blue came to live in the Foster's home? Can you imagine if they did that after we had finished the series? No one would care. And so because the Powerpuff Girl movie is a prequel, we know nothing too drastic can happen in the plot, because everything needs to remain the same in order to fit the show's canon. I mean, hell, we've even seen this very plot done in the show itself. In the episode Town and Out, where the girls move to a new town called Citiesville, they try to establish themselves as superheroes, but end up causing a lot of collateral damage which causes the town to hate them.
Do you realize that you did over $3 million in property damage to that bridge? It's not replaceable!
Christ, we even get an almost identical scene as we see the girls are forced to walk home. Yet, funnily enough, the whole issue of the Powerpuff Girls causing collateral damage isn't really resolved, as we see them doing this in the TV series. So clearly no lesson was learned, and clearly the townsfolk aren't too bothered by it after all. I mean, they even keep doing it in the series that was made after the film. Then again, a lot of the town's hatred for the girls seems to be more focused on the way they look than anything else.
Excuse me, ma'am. I think you dropped this.
I thought the zoo kept all the animals in cages.
Like, okay, bitch. The film also suffers from a lot of stupid things needing to happen in order to allow the plot to progress, such as the professor not cautioning the girls about using their superpowers at all before sending them off to school. Yet he is clearly concerned that they may use their superpowers, as that's all he asked when going to collect them later that day.
Your girls were perfect. Perfect, normal, well-behaved little girls.
Nothing out of the ordinary?
He then later gives them a speech about using their powers, but this is after they've caused all the destruction.
Take it easy with the powers tomorrow. Just give Townsville a little time to understand your specialness, okay?
Like, Professor, you're a smart man. Don't you think something like this would have been better said before you sent them out into the world? Man, he's even more neglectful than Geppetto when he just sent Pinocchio out alone. Or there's the moment after the girls have caused the city destruction. Rather than arresting them at the scene of the crime, I guess the police just let them return home, only to have the professor arrested the next day whilst the girls are at school. This only happens so that he then can't go and pick them up, so that the girls will then think that he hates them. But then once the girls have been tricked into helping Mojo Jojo set up his villainous plan, the film now needs the professor back in the plot so he can say how disappointed he is in them. So to bring him back, the police simply release him back home the very next day, and don't even bother to question the girls or take them in. It just feels like this really wasn't the right story to try and tell on the big screen. I want to quickly compare the Powerpuff Girls movie to another Cartoon Network movie that I think was done right, and that's Ed, Edd and Eddy's Big Picture Showdown. I've talked about this in greater detail already, so I'll keep it brief for this video. But basically, Ed, Edd and Eddy's movie is an example of how a film special should be handled. The Eds have finally gone too far and all the other children are now out to get them, so the stakes are raised. In order to escape the other children, the Eds must leave the cul-de-sac, which is something that rarely happened in the show. And so we get to see a whole bunch of new locations, so the scale is raised. We get a heated argument between Eddy and Double D, which has an emotional payoff. We also get a massive character reveal for something that had been long foreshadowed and built up in the show's history. But most importantly, because this was the show's finale, we were able to resolve the show's overall issue, and have the Eds finally get accepted by the other kids, thus giving us closure for the series. The Powerpuff Girls movie can't really offer any of this, because as I've said before, it's a prequel. You know, why not instead of a prequel, do something epic like all the villains joining together and actually managing to defeat the Powerpuff Girls? Oh wait, they did that. Well, how about there's a new supervillain in town, so powerful that the girls now have to team up with one of the former Townsville villains in order to beat it? Oh, wait, they did that. Well, how about another person creates their own version of the Powerpuff Girls, but instead of being good, they're evil? Oh, wait, they did that. Well, how about a plot involving time travel? Oh, wait, they did that. Twice. Yeah, so I guess to the writer's credit, much of the obvious go-to ideas had already been done in the TV show. Not to mention that because the series was due to continue after the film, you can't really have too much stuff happen that would change the status quo. But what we could do is go Lilo and Stitch 2 style, where in that film Stitch begins to glitch out as his molecules begin to fail. You could do a similar thing with the Powerpuff Girls, in where you have the ingredients which originally made them begin to break down, and if they don't find a way to stop this process, then they will revert back to their original components. This will not only make for a plot where the stakes have never been higher, but will also allow for a much more emotionally driven story, something that will help it stand out from the mostly light-hearted TV series, but at the same time, also keeping true to the series, as we know the idea of them breaking down like this is viable because we've already seen it happen in the show. Hell, we could even keep the actual 5-minute opening of the film showing the girls' creation, as it will give more emotion for when the professor faces the threat on losing them. But perhaps it wasn't just the story that caused issue, and that some of the film's problems lied within some drama going on behind the scenes. Craig McCracken did mention that partway through the film's development, the heads at Cartoon Network had changed, and when the new bosses saw what had been completed, they were allegedly concerned that the film wasn't going to be poppy enough. So perhaps they had some intervention in the story, as the film is oddly short for a cinema release, sitting at just over an hour's runtime, and it does feel like some scenes were removed or cut down. The second act in particular feels incredibly rushed. There's one moment where the girls are instructed by Mojo Jojo to retrieve some Chemical X from the professor's lab, and considering this is right after they think the professor hates them, you think this would be a big deal for them having to return home, or they would at least be concerned that he's missing from the house due to being arrested, which funny enough they are later on, but whatever. Here though, they just conveniently find another batch of Chemical X lying in the lab, take it, bring it to Mojo, and that happens within literal seconds. Then at the end of the film, there's the professor suddenly coming back with an antidote to Chemical X. This comes out of absolutely nowhere, and I feel there should have been more emphasis on him creating this antidote in the first place. Perhaps the girls would spot it whilst returning to the lab, which would make them question whether he's trying to turn them back. Even the way he explains it on screen makes it feel like this scene was botched in.
Girls, where are you? You were right. We should try and stop Mojo, and I know how. I whipped up an antidote to Chemical X. It'll do away with his powers. Girls.
I mean, last we saw the professor, he was left in Mojo's lab in the middle of the city, yet within 5 minutes of screen time he managed to get all the way back home, make the antidote, and get back here again. But regardless of whether there was drama going on behind the scenes, it doesn't change the fact that the final product ends up being a bit of a mess. In later interviews, Craig McCracken will admit that he feels part of the film's failure was because it was too serious.
Maybe I wish it was a little sillier, a little lighter, a little more, not so heavy the whole time.
But I honestly don't think that was the issue. The television episode Speed Demon, for example, is an episode which is incredibly dark and takes itself incredibly serious, yet is probably one of my favourite episodes. The problem wasn't the film being too serious, it's that it was just too boring. Even when action moments are happening on screen, it still feels lackluster. There's a scene where the girls are playing tag in the city, which begins causing a lot of damage. There are some nice shots here, and we see a lot of destruction happening, but it just drags on for way too long. Part of the reason I love the TV series was for the creative fight scenes and the amount of violence they could have. In this film, we don't even see the girls fight anything until around the 50-minute mark. But even then, this feels tame compared to some of the stuff you'd see in the show. I think the final nail in the coffin to seal the film's fate would have been the competition from other studios. Disney had also released Lilo and Stitch into cinemas, not only a film with a much higher budget and more marketing put into it, but overall just a better family film. Better animation, better story, better emotion, and funnily enough is also about a lab creation that causes destruction. And then there was the other film release, Men in Black 2, which arguably could have been the even bigger threat, as this would have taken away a lot of that older audience that Cartoon Network was banking on. In conclusion, it's a shame the Powerpuff Girls movie turned out the way it did, as there was a lot of potential for it. The film isn't insultingly bad, it doesn't do any disservice to the characters, and you can see they were trying to make it have a more mature approach with some emotional moments. But overall, it just fell a bit flat. And sadly, the poor performance meant that Cartoon Network never did any future cinematic releases. Can you imagine in an alternate timeline where we got Samurai Jack, codenamed Kids Next Door, and Ed, Edd and Eddy all shown on the big screen? Though it's not all bad news, as though being a bomb at the box office, the film did do better on home video sales, and is generally looked back upon more favourably these days when compared to some of the newer Powerpuff Girls material that came out after. At the end of the day, the film wasn't bad, just disappointing. A painfully average film that got a painfully average response.
Hey, that's a good name for them. Powerpuff Girls, yeah. I like that. Wonder if they will. I'll run it by them.
I don't know. Personally, I'd prefer the Whoop-Ass Girls.